From Everybody Studios, we're jumping off the pages of SouthPark Magazine as we bring the stories to life that make up the art and soul of Charlotte. This is SouthPark Says with Krisha Chatra. Well, pull up, turn it up, and take a seat. We're learning about some intriguing and somewhat mysterious historical facts from the Charlotte Museum of History today. This is episode 5 of SouthPark Says with Krisha Chatra. Now, have you ever wondered why Charlotte is called the Hornet's Nest? Well, joining me in Everybody Studios today is Terri White, President and CEO of Charlotte's Museum of History, and Jason Luker, who is also the Chief Operating Officer of the museum. Welcome to Everybody Studios today in SouthPark Says.
Thank you very much
for having us.
Yeah, I'm so glad you guys are here. So we will get to the Hornet's Nest because everyone wants to know the history behind that.
Yeah.
But I want to draw your attention to an article that was in the May issue of SouthPark Magazine, written by our contributing writer, Gavin Powers, who talks about Mecklenburg's Declaration of Independence that came a full 15 months before Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration in 1776. Does it mean that Charlotte and Mecklenburg County actually declared itself independent from the British before the country did with Thomas Jefferson?
Yes. With an asterisk next to it, yes.
With an asterisk. Okay, I want to hear why. And what is MecDec about then? Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, MecDec came place in May 20th, 1775. It's the 250th anniversary of it. It really is a culmination of years of disputes and anger that you see here in the Charlotte area with the British Empire. And that really kind of culminated in a meeting that was taking place in Center Charlotte with some of the leaders in the area, kind of discuss some of their beef with the British.
Right.
And they hear about the shooting that takes place at Lexington and Concord, which happened in April prior to their meeting in May. This was the final straw, and they decided we've had enough with the British, and we're going to declare ourselves independent. We're going to resolve ourselves from the British Empire. And they wrote this document, signed their names to it, gave it to Captain Jack, which was a local tavern keeper, James Jack, and he delivered it up to Philadelphia to the Continental Congress.
Okay, first of all, Captain Jack, as in Captain Jack Brew from Old Mecklenburg Brewery. Is that where that comes from?
Yep.
Okay, so he was actually a real tavern owner, and they tapped him to make this big, long ride to declare themselves independent after all of the beef that they had with the British. That kind of sounds similar to Paul Revere.
It's a little like Paul Revere. The difference is Paul Revere is, it was a planned trip. Like once the British are invading, he's going to let people know and go and warn them. Captain Jack is a little bit more like, we're going to ride up, and it's a much longer ride, to let everyone know that we are going to kick this to the curb and kind of take care of ourselves from here on out.
Right. So he rode a much longer route. So from here to Philadelphia?
Philadelphia, yeah.
Okay. And what was the purpose of the ride?
The purpose of the ride was to deliver the documents. He was supposed to give them to the representatives of North Carolina for the colonies, and they were supposed to be able to present that to the Continental Congress. This is where it gets a little unsure what happens because they kind of disappear at this moment in time. One of the main theories is that Captain Jack did deliver them to the representatives, but the North Carolina representatives were part of the Olive Branch Treaty Group, if you remember that from our history, where they're still trying to make peace with the British, still trying to maintain British subjects. And they would consider this act very treasonous and just kind of pocketed it and didn't present it to anybody. And then Captain Jack rode back, came back to the colonies and let them know, hey, or to Charlotte, let them know, I did my job. We go drink about
delivered.
it. So it was delivered. So that's where it kind of falls into the kind of the mist of history. Is what happened when it went up to Philadelphia, and why was it not actually presented to anybody at that time?
And was Mecklenburg County the first area, first city, first county to actually declare itself independent, as far as we know, prior to July 4th, 1776?
It is. I mean, it's one of those situations where if you even look at Boston, where a lot of the action was taking place, it was pushing towards independence. But there hadn't been a written down signed document yet that stated that we are independent. And that's what Mecklenburg County is saying that they did. They signed a document under people that are they're representing the people of Charlotte and sent it out to be broadcast to the world that they are basically kicking the British to the curb.
Mm.
So that's a little different. So the fighting is really taking place at that moment in time in the northern colonies, but this is the first decorative actual document that was claiming separation.
And that's a really big deal. That's a
Mhm.
really big deal to say that Mecklenburg County was the first area that had declared itself independent from the British. And we've just had enough. And thank you so much for that overview, Jason. And Terri, do you have any idea like how many people actually might have signed this document? And was it a risk to actually sign it?
So no, I don't know how many people signed it, but I would say that it was a risk in that, to Jason's point, at this point we were still colonies of the British Empire, and so to tell King George that you no longer want to listen to him would have been considered an act of treason.
Mm,
So to have this independent mindset, this rebellious spirit, although we cheer for that as Americans,
mhm.
especially at that time, it would have been seen as being troublemakers or criminals and things of that nature. So,
So, and if they would have gotten caught, all of their names are on the document. If Captain Jack would
Mhm.
have
mhm,
gotten caught on the way up to Philadelphia because it was a much longer ride
mhm,
from here to Philadelphia and then Paul Revere took. He had a chance to get caught. And if he would
mhm.
have gotten caught with all those names on the document, what would have happened to all of those legislatures, those opinion leaders, those leaders here in Charlotte, whose names were actually on that document?
So, depending on who he gets caught by, if he gets caught by fellow anti-British people, they may have said, "Hey, you want something to drink on your way?" But if he was caught by loyalists or maybe even by native tribes who were
Mm,
around, it could
mm,
have ended not well for
mm,
him, for
mm,
sure. Either because this is someone who is just further colonizing our land, and
mm,
so we're just going to take you out of the picture, or how dare you affront His Royal Highness? We're
mm.
going to nip this in the bud before it gets all the way to Philadelphia.
Wow, so there was a large risk. Did you wanna add to
Yeah,
that?
and they would be considered treasonous. They would have been considered traitors to the crown, deserving of death.
Mm,
There's actually another document that is called the Mecklenburg Resolves that was penned in May 31st,
okay.
which goes through as 20s in the 20s. We'll say in the 20s, different resolves that basically where they go step by step and show how they're going to Mecklenburg is going to govern itself until the Continental Congress or the state or the colonies can take over control and govern us as independent
Mhm,
the king from England.
mhm,
And in this, it really goes through these different governance kind of activities, well thought out. And part of that, they're even saying is like, if you are a representative of the British Crown, we will consider you an enemy. We're going to raise up militias to protect ourselves.
mhm,
And to the point where they put Thomas Polk and Dr. Kennedy in charge of getting arms and munition. So they recognized that they needed to protect themselves and that this was an act of great trial. And that document gets into the hands of the governor of North Carolina,
mhm.
and he sends it on to England and calls it a treasonous act that as soon as he can address, he will.
Oh, wow.
And that is recorded. I mean, we have copies of the resolves through newspapers at the time.
So the governor didn't have anything to do with this document in terms of creating it. He was actually not for
No,
it.
he was very much right. He was a loyalist. He was a British.
He was
He was
British.
appointed by the British
Mm,
over
mhm,
the colony of
mhm,
North Carolina. So he saw this as the most. He called it the most treasonous act
mm.
yet. And you got
Wow.
to keep in mind that's after the firing with the Lexington Concord and things like that. He considers this even more treasonous,
Mm.
especially in North Carolina. So that kind of to me shows that these people are putting their life on the line to make these proclamations and to put their names to it to be easily found was very bold.
Right, definitely,
Yeah.
and Yeah, and yeah, very bold step, and they just believed in what they believed in so wholeheartedly that they were willing to put their life on the line.
Most definitely. Yes.
Yeah, I think that history has showed us that people have to make those very hard choices. So, what happened to the documents? How come we don't have record of them?
All right. Well, this is where all right, this is where it gets a little exciting. We'll put it that way. We're doing an exhibit on the MecDec, and one of our parts of the exhibit is kind of going through the controversy of its history. The thing is, the original document that Captain Jack delivered
Right.
disappears. We
Hmm.
do not have it. It is rewritten by memory
Hmm.
in 1800, multiple years removed from the actual war. And it was rewritten by a guy named John McNitt Alexander, who lived up in West present day Huntersville. And he apparently was the keeper of all the documents, and his house caught on fire and everything burned.
Oh,
So he was asked to rewrite it. He rewrote one, which was given to William Davy. For any UNC Chapel Hill fans, they all know William Davy.
right.
And that copy still resides at UNC. And this goes through, that's where you see the first time mentioned the Declaration of Independence.
Hmm.
This quickly became a bit of a controversy. By 1819, is being argued, is this real? To the point that even Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had discussed it in letters to one another, where John Adams, and I'm paraphrasing with this, John Adams is saying, hey, I hear that, these guys back in Charlotte had claimed their independence, and it sounds a whole lot like what you said in 1776. And
Uh-oh.
Thomas Jefferson's like,
Plagiarism.
yeah, that's what he's basically he's incurring. And Thomas Jefferson says to John Adams, no, that's a bunch of trash. I wrote this myself. I don't know
Hmm.
who these guys are, kind of a thing. So you had this big debate about was the first call for Declaration of Independence come from Charlottetown, and from that's what it was called at the time, from Mecklenburg, this
Charlottetown.
backcountry little crossroads. It's not the beautiful city that we know today. It was
Mm.
just a small little villa
Mhm.
that wrote this document that basically was a first call for independence, or is it just kind of right on the coattails of Thomas Jefferson?
Oh,
So,
interesting. And we saw a little bit of that that I guess you would say that conflict or that competition play out in Hamilton when we go to see the Broadway play that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams have for each other, that little contentious back
oh
and
yeah,
forth.
it's definitely a bromance. And they love picking on each other.
That's right. Yeah. So, and Thomas Jefferson couldn't be deigned to admit that his words came from, as you said, very pesky and tenacious people down here in Charlottetown.
Right. Exactly.
So it went back and forth, and the documents were never found. You said that they were repenned by memory, but then destroyed in a fire.
Yeah, there was the fire took place, and then there was repinned. And by 1819, that's when the letters emerged that talked about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams discussing it.
Right.
And there's several books that started to be published around the turn of the century to kind of refute the MecDec. The state in 1830 did this big study to try to prove that the MecDec was real.
Hmm.
And they came to the conclusion that it was real. And some of their evidence was key witnesses.
Mm.
People being saying, "Oh, I was there," or my grandfather was there, or things of that nature, to put their name towards what John McNitt Alexander had written, stating that there was a Declaration of Independence. And then you had these other people like Dr. Holt, who wrote a book in 1907, goes through and he undermines all of the evidence towards the MecDec to kind of say, you have no true proof. You just got these remembrances of remembrances. You have a document that was rewritten by a guy pushing to 70 years old. It just doesn't fly. You don't have
Mhm.
the evidence.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is all before they found the resolves. The Mecklenburg resolves had been lost as well.
Oh, and
But
that's different than the Declaration.
right, that was the one that was written in May 31st, 1775.
Right.
So just a couple of days removed from
Yes.
the MecDec.
Right.
But that document was rediscovered
Mm.
and proven to be correct, that it was historic. So we do know on May 31st, 1775, that a group of guys in Charlotte wrote a document about being independent. They didn't say Declaration of Independence. They actually said we resolved not to be part of the British Empire because you said we're rebels, so by God, we'll be rebels. And so they set up their how they're going to function. So, and as I mentioned, Governor Martin said that was a treasonous act.
Right.
So the debate is not really on, did Charlotte have a rebellious spirit? Did Charlotte have the first steps of independence? It's just a matter, did they actually say the word Declaration of Independence?
That's right.
And that's the big debate.
Okay. And we believe, or at least the museum, from the museum's point of view, Terri, believes that they did. And that's why you're having a celebration on May 20th. Is that correct? Because that's the date that the Declaration was actually written.
So our exhibit will open on May 20th, and we have sort of a member and main supporter reception on the 22nd. But the museum doesn't have an official position. One of the beauties about being a history museum is that our job is not to convince you something happened. Our job is to prevent all the evidence and let you make up your own mind.
Mhm.
And since there is no definitive, here's a copy of the MecDec, here's the report of John McNitt's fire, insurance liability form, we have no way of definitively proving or disproving that this happened. But what we can do is present all of the facts and evidence on both sides around it
Mm.
and letting the visitor interpret it and think about it for themselves. I also think, more importantly, part of the exhibit is how has Charlotte commemorated this over the years?
Right.
Because, 1775, it's 2025. Who cares? That's the average person who feels that way. But throughout the centuries, what we see is that this is, whether or not, you think the physical document itself is real, the spirit of the document is what has lived on in Charlotte.
Mm.
So this idea that we are not going to accept mistreatment by people who mistreat and disrespect us is something that has carried on throughout history, for very different causes. From as far as May 20th, 1861 was the day that North Carolina seceded from the Union because they didn't like what the Union had to say, up to May 20th in the 1960s when Johnson C. Smith students staged sit-ins to protest mistreatment by African Americans in local businesses. So May 20th as a callback to a specific document, it's up for debate. But May 20th is a day for people in Charlotte and the greater Charlotte region to say, nah, this is our time to declare what we want for ourselves, is the larger story.
Sure. That's really interesting and an excellent point because
Mhm.
by that you're saying that the spirit of rebelliousness in a way, or actually
Absolutely.
standing up for what you believe is right, lives on here in Charlotte. And
Absolutely.
the History Museum tries to commemorate that. So tell us a little bit more about how the museum works with the city to sort of bring that spirit alive and the kind of activities that you have that actually do represent Charlotte as, a trailblazer.
Absolutely. So, what I'll say is that what we really strive for in this current era of the museum is to not be an ivory tower, to not be a mausoleum of artifacts and dead people. We want history to be a living, breathing experience for people and for our communities. So we do a lot of community outreach, community engagement. We have a series of programs for everyone from 0 to 100 that connect to different parts of Charlotte's history. I think one, the fact that we're the caretakers of the oldest standing home in Mecklenburg County, the 1774 Rock House, home of an alleged MecDec signer.
Hmm.
We take care of that. So we get you to the 18th century. We do programs and exhibits that take you all the way up through the restored Rosenwald School that we have, Salome, that talks about this has not been a perfect society, but here are the good things that have come out of it, even still. So here's this community in Mallard Creek showing their resistance and their resilience in the face of difficulty and strife. And what the feedback that we get from people from all communities is that they finally are starting to see themselves represented in what we produce at the museum. It's not the traditional history museum that you may have experienced as a child, thankfully. We're really a more immersive, engaging institution and trying to continue even further down that path.
Okay. So then in that vein, how do you then work with younger people? For instance,
Mhm.
schools, I'm sure you have school programs to get younger people excited because you're right. When you hear about history, you think about, those visions of, being dragged by your parents to a museum
Yeah.
and you've worked at the Smithsonian. So
Mhm.
how do you address that in your
Well, I will
programming?
say at Smithsonian, I had the benefit of being at Air and Space. So as soon as you see giant airplanes, it's like, "Whoa,
That
I'm gonna
okay.
touch an
Right.
airplane."
That's a game changer.
Right. But to the larger point, what we do is one, we are the de facto third grade field trip for most schools. But what we've done is Mia, our education manager, really customizes each trip based on what the teacher and the educators tell her they're learning in class, what they want to specialize in. So we teach the same history and customize it to that lesson plan. And we do a lot of interactive, hands-on things. There is nothing more hilarious than watching children try to learn what a bedpan is, and you just pass around this chamber pot and say, "What do you think this is?"
Oh
And when you
no.
tell them, they're like, "Ew."
Ew.
Or playing with 18th century toys, and then
Mm,
you think your kids love Game Boy, or maybe not Game Boy,
not Game Boy
You
anymore.
dated yourself a little bit on that one. Yeah.
Switch,
Switch.
whatever the young people are playing. Give
Right.
them a ball and a cup, and I
Mm.
promise you they will be even more competitive. But they do things like planting in our herb garden. They make ink and learn to write in cursive with quills, and that's always kind of funny also. In the Salome School, we have actual school desks from North Carolina schools from that time period, the 1920s, and seeing young people say, "Oh my God, this is the desk that they had to sit in. What is that on the wall?" Looking at the cursive and just it being like hieroglyphics to them. Even the adults, there's Jason and I are not short people, and there are people taller than us that try to squeeze into these little itty bitty desks because it's just so exciting to see something different from what you see every day.
Right.
So as far as children, we really go above and beyond and out of our way to incorporate what their educators are telling us, they're doing, so that what we do complements that.
I think
Perfect.
it's always with kids, especially this time of history. Um, what we find children always asking is this real?
Mhm.
Because so much of their life now is digital
Mhm.
and virtual, and to be able to come to a site and walk into a room that is so old,
Mm.
to see things that are alien to them but connected.
Mm.
What's fascinating about the chamber pot? Just use that as an example because it's we all understand what we need, and to see something that's so different, they can immediately place themselves in the past, and they
Mhm.
can picture themselves. Oh man, if I had to do that, what would that be like? And I think that's the power of a museum, a power for a historical site, is it puts you in the place, it puts you in the history, and causes you to start to relate to those
Mhm.
in the past.
Mhm.
And then when you're able to reveal to them, well, their lives are so much different than ours. But the what they went through, the sacrifices, the struggles, the triumphs, the tragedies, have made who we are today.
That's right.
It starts to be very memorable to them,
Mhm.
and that's one of the things that we're excited about with the revolutionary time period, because so much of that is we think, oh, that happened way up in Boston, or that happened in DC, or what have you. When DC didn't exist, but that's what people think.
Mhm.
To be able to say, no, that happened here. And it happened by
Mm.
people like me and you that are making decisions about their lives, about their families, about their kids, that really had long lasting effects.
Mhm.
So when it's not, when you're able to go to the Charlotte Museum of History, when you're able to go to the Alexander Rock House, you start to really feel and sense the history that permeates through the ground that we walk on.
Right. I think that's an excellent point
Mm.
because you do think about the kids' lives nowadays. They're the generation alpha, the generation that is in third grade, like you said, grew up only knowing about, electronics and iPads and digital learning. And some of them even started school during the pandemic
Mm,
online, virtual
Mhm.
learning.
yep.
but to put them in a place where they can think about what it might have taken for someone to fight for what they enjoy today as just natural freedoms is really startling and I think very important.
Yep.
So it's wonderful that you keep that alive through the museum. My guests today are Terri White and Jason Luker, both representing the Charlotte History Museum. And I'm so glad to have you today because we really don't, in South Park Magazine, obviously, we try to elevate the lifestyles of people that live in this area, but we don't really think about where that lifestyle maybe has come from.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really intriguing to talk to you about some of the history that we all enjoy and benefit from, now that we're living our lives in the modern world. But I do want to find out a little bit about the way that we reference ourselves and where that might have come from. One of the questions is the hornet's nest.
Oh, yes.
And so we've been talking a lot about rebels here and about, being courageous and standing up for something and rebel rousing, so to speak.
Mm.
Is that where the idea of a hornet's nest came from?
Yes. Well, I always like to preface this.
Okay.
Take yourself back to when you were a kid and you wanted a nickname.
Mm,
The nickname that stuck was the one that was given to you.
that's right.
And usually by someone that's being not the best person. The bullies get to tell the nicknames.
Right.
That's how we got the Hornets name.
Mm.
Gotta put yourself back in 1780s. I always get those words.
Yeah, 1780s.
Back in 1780, the war has moved to the south. It had been up north, and we basically got to a stalemate. And so the British had thought, we'll go through the Carolinas and through Georgia, roll up that part of the colonies, and pin George Washington and his boys up in the New England area and Pennsylvania, in that area. Great plan. And they also thought, well, when we go through the South, we'll find a lot of people that are loyal. And that's true along the coastline. When they came through Charleston, they found a lot of loyalists. When they came up to Camden, were able to beat back the army that was being the Patriot Army being led by Horatio Gates. They whipped them and were able to build up a lot more loyalists. So they moved into Charlotte. Lord Cornwallis, who was the leader of the group, moved into Charlotte, and they thought they were going to continue to have these string of victories that they've only known at the beginning of what's called the Southern Campaign. When they came to Charlotte, though, in the surrounding area, they ran into a bunch of patriots.
Mm.
These guys who wrote in 1775 that they were no longer going to be British.
Well, now we call them patriots.
we
Now we
now
call
call them
it,
patriots. They're
right.
calling them treasonous
Treasonous.
somebodies back then.
Rebels back then.
Rebels,
yeah.
exactly. But they ran into these guys and just found themselves just constantly being harassed. Wherever they went, they got shot at, basically. Downtown, at the crossroads, so I guess we call it uptown, Charlotte, is a battlefield. A small battlefield, but a battlefield where when the British were coming in, they were being shot at by a bunch of rebels.
Mhm.
And Lord Cornwallis called it a virtual hornet's nest of rebellion.
Wow.
And of course, we liked that nickname a lot
yeah.
and grabbed onto it. And ever since then, Charlotte's had the hornet's nest as one of its symbols.
That's amazing. From Lord Cornwallis.
Lord Cornwallis himself.
Which it wasn't like you said, a compliment. It wasn't a compliment at all.
Not
But
the least bit.
But the Charlotteans took it as one. And so that's really interesting because I think a lot of people I've heard, just thought that there was a very large hornet population.
We do have that too, but that's a side point.
It's the murder one.
Exactly.
This is much more colorful, but definitely something that you can rise up to. So,
Nice.
so that's
It's one
why
of my
we have,
favorite stories in
Uh-huh.
Charlotte's history because
yeah.
you just in your mind you just picture Cornwallis running away like, oh no, peace, hornets, they're too crazy.
They're crazy.
And it is a very Charlotte thing that someone tries to disrespect us and we turn it into a compliment. Like
That's
the
right.
gateway
We'll
to
sting ya.
Gastonia.
Oh, yeah.
Is another backhanded compliment.
Yeah,
where
yeah.
Which one is this?
Oh,
the gateway to Gastonia, the SNL joke.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We've taken it as a compliment. Like, yeah, we are, gateway to
The
Gastonia.
gateway to
Good for us.
Gastonia.
That's right.
Right. Well, I mean, and hey, it's good publicity too.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. So, hence the name of our basketball team
Mhm.
and so many
Mhm.
other mascots that are affiliated with the Hornets. Very interesting for sure.
It was kind of where when the Hornets moved from Charlotte, there was more people complaining about the nickname leaving than the actual basketball team,
Wow.
Mm.
and been wanting. And there's well written about how Charlotte as a city tried to get the Hornets name back especially when we got the expansion team when we were the Bobcats. There was an attempt to get the Hornets back from the name back from New Orleans. And it wasn't so much later that they actually were able to get the name of the Hornets back to the city. It's always been associated with that name and been very passionate about the being called the Hornets.
Wow, that's yeah, and we finally did.
And we
We got
finally
it
did.
back. Perfect. So, what other things like that do you feel that people should know about their city that is steeped in history that you really wish that, oh, if only people knew? Do you have like one of those moments?
I think it's one of the things is both trying about Charlotte, but it's also unique about Charlotte is what's referred to as the Charlotte way.
Hmm.
And this is where Charlotte is always looking to reinvent itself. It's very, very open, mobile,
Hmm.
and very, certain lines as progressive, and has been very inviting to larger groups and people coming in. It's made Charlotte grow so rapidly, which is beautiful. It's created the wonderful city we all call home. However, Charlotte has no qualms about knocking something down.
Mm.
If something's 5 minutes old, it's considered old in Charlotte, and that's been one of those things that has been wonderful about Charlotte is vitality, but at the exact same time for a history, I think it's one of been our biggest problems is we lose connection with our history because we so easily dismiss it and
Mhm.
Mm.
so easily wipe it away. If Charlotte's history was in Greensboro, it would be so much more touted.
Mm.
If Charlotte's history was in Savannah, or if Charlotte's history was in Atlanta, even cities that have grown rapidly, the uniqueness, the authenticity, the importance of major moments like the Revolutionary time period would be much more celebrated than you see here in Charlotte. I think that's why MecDec has been so people have grabbed onto it is because it's one of the few parties we celebrate ourselves with.
Mm.
We don't associate ourselves with much other history, and I think that's why MecDec has lived on so long, even though it's been controversial. Has been it's the only party we do that we are getting excited about be from Mecklenburg or be from
Mhm.
Charlotte,
Mhm.
and I think that's fascinating to me as being
Yeah.
a historian in this area because you hear people say all the time, it's like, oh, nothing's ever happened in Charlotte. It's just a banking town. It's
Right.
like, no, man. It's one being a banking town. That's history. That
Right.
didn't just happen.
Right.
But two, just the rich history of Charlotte has always been there, just lying underneath the crust.
Well, what do you think that we can do? Maybe as a city or as a local government, even as a magazine. We do have an article about MecDec in the May issue about this celebration. But what do you think that people can do to try to elevate and daylight some of the history that you feel like is not being celebrated? And obviously, you mentioned that it's because Charlotte is such a progressive town in the
Mhm.
sense that we're growing really fast. We want to stay relevant. We want to attract visitors, and we've done a very good job of that from all over the country that want to come here for a high quality of life and a relatively lower cost of living from where they're probably coming from.
Yes.
Mhm.
So the modern amenities are what sells people moving here. But what do you think that the city and the rest of the organizations that make the fabric of this community can do to daylight some of the history?
So there are a few things. One, you mentioned the people who move here. I'm a transplant.
Mm.
Um, the shiny job with the big salary and the cost of living and all that might move you here, but what's going to keep you here is your quality of life.
Mm.
And I very often say to our sponsor friends in the corporate world, it's because it's a banking town, they are very number spreadsheet focused. And there's a time and place for that. But there's not a human in this country that when they go on vacation, they say, you know what, I'm going to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars and go out of town. And you know what I'm going to go see? Those bank lobbies. That's going to be the highlight of my trip. No one says I'm going to go out of town and spend a week looking at, the affordable housing of another city. No one says I want to look and see what investments someone's making in schools.
Mm.
Those are worthy causes. And please do not take this as me saying schools and housing don't matter. 100% against, opposite of what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But Charlotte is the tourism capital of the Carolinas. And so, full stop, if you want people to come here and to stay here, have their children, have their kids grow up and say, I'm a Charlottean no matter where they go and have that generational longevity that helps keep history preserved and isn't as turnkey as it has been,
Mm.
you have to invest in the arts and humanities beyond a surface level.
Mm.
And I know, I mean, it's the age old saying, well, they just want more money. But when you look at cities our size, I'm not talking about a New York, I'm not talking about an LA. I'm looking at a Nashville, I'm looking at a Baltimore, I'm looking at a Minneapolis. When you go dollar for dollar per citizen, what we spend on the arts, including your namesake history museum, compared to them, is not on the same level. So when you look at those numbers and spreadsheets, you can't expect us to compete with them at a fraction of the cost.
Mm.
If your light bill has gone up because of, the economy and all that, imagine what our light bill is.
Mhm.
If you are complaining you're not getting a raise and oh my God, eggs are $50 each, imagine on a nonprofit salary in a city that keeps telling us, oh, but you can work on the lack of funding that you've had for the last 30 years.
Mm.
Full stop. That's the number one thing. Two, I would say that to Jason's point, we're a city that really loves big, grand gestures. We want to turn over and say, look, with this big, new, shiny thing. Big, new, shiny things are important. But what we're finding in our work is that it are the communities and the smaller stories that people either take for granted or overlook that really make up the richness of a community. Um, and getting people comfortable to share their stories and share their cultures and heritage beyond a surface level is one of the things that we aim to do. We have a project that we do with Charlotte is Creative called our Path of Portrait series.
Mhm.
And we don't highlight Cornwallis.
Right.
We don't highlight Tryon. We don't highlight even Mr. Gant, these major celebrity figures in our history. We find the people who have been overlooked and who don't get the same level of recognition and create art to help tell their story to people who may not know it. To me, I think those are the two things. One, you got to pay for it.
Right.
The bill comes due. You got to pay for something. If we can pay for $650 million stadiums, surely we can pay $600,000 for a history museum.
It's about priorities and value, right? What you
Absolutely.
value, what you prioritize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you can see, I'm very passionate about
Sure.
it.
Obviously. And good. I mean, you should be. That's your role too.
It is.
Uh-huh.
It is. Help me not die of a heart attack, Charlotte. But I mean, even beyond just the money, because I mean, bills do come due. Beyond that, you can't, brag about being first in freedom and first in this, and we're the hornet's nest. We don't let anyone push us around, and then not invest in saving and preserving that story.
Mm.
Help the arts and the humanities community make you not just the first, but the best.
Mm.
Maybe I'm just competitive. I don't know.
Well, you're here to
But
that. Yeah. If I had a
make us
Captain
the
Jack,
best.
if I had a Captain Jack, I would cheer to that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, every kid, and that's something that I share with MecDec. As a native Pennsylvanian, we never heard about MecDec. When I first heard this, I said, "What lies have you been telling
Oh my
yourself?"
goodness.
But
Right.
I knew about the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
Right.
So now let's say you invest in that story to get this at a national level. Everyone should at least know the concept that MecDec existed or not. Now we have, well, who's better, Captain Jack or Paul Revere? Now I have two men on horses to learn about, and it makes it a little more interesting. It makes learning in that time period a little more enriching. So yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Did you want to add to that, or you? Yeah, you were looking like you did.
Well, yeah,
But-
it's always in my mind is if you're in Charlotte and you're driving down Stonewall Street and you wonder to yourself, why is this street called Stonewall?
Right.
You better be writing to a check to the Charlotte Museum of History.
Right.
So we can tell that story. So
Right.
you know where it comes from and know about your history of the city. So every last one of us, if you're trying, is it Brookshire or Brookshire or what is the name? Who is this person? Write that check to the Charlotte Museum of History because you want to know, and we're going to be the ones that are going to be able to not only tell you, but maintain the documents and the materials and the objects and the collections to preserve it.
That's a great point.
Or
That's a great point.
if you see a really cool old abandoned building, Just
Don't tear it down. Wait,
Don't tear it
just
down.
pause a second.
Let us help you with the research. We can connect you with the people to stabilize it and preserve it so that we don't have a bunch of glass, millennial gray, formless squares all over the place. And I'm saying this as a millennial. We don't need any more millennial gray. But help us save. Whenever I'm driving around, I see all kinds of cool looking buildings that are just sitting. Um, let us be that advocate for you. Now we don't want them. There's
That's
We
right.
don't want to be responsible for them, but we can give you the resources to help save that and save the character of your communities.
Right.
And it's not just the big grand buildings either. If there's an old house, you talk about affordable housing,
Mm-hmm.
historic preservation is the number one way to create affordable housing.
Right.
Because when you build brand new homes, that developer is not thinking, oh, let me make these homes as cheaply as possible
Mm-hmm.
so that these people can pay the lowest mortgage possible.
Right.
That's just not the business model. And
Right.
I don't fault them for that. It's not their business model. But when you keep a home that is 70, 100, 150 years old and you preserve it and you upgrade it, and now you have this house that's been here, frankly, it might last a little better than some of these newer houses. Now you're not only developing the economy because you're creating jobs for the people that will be doing the construction and preservation work within it, but now you've created a home that is more affordable than something that's brand new.
Right.
When you talk about uh, education programs and schools of that nature, the answer is not always scrap what we have and just do something brand new. Sometimes we just had our preservation awards last night. Sometimes it's what are the good bits that we have? Let's save those and expand upon it, not just scrapping it and starting new. If you keep starting new every 10 years, you're going to end up in the situation we're in.
That's right. And maybe that's actually a call for the development community and the residential community to pair their decision making with the Museum of History. At that point of looking for a permit or trying to get a rezoning. I mean, maybe that's just your role to be inserted in that as a resource. So we're getting to the end of our time here, but I want to quickly ask you, what are some of the upcoming exhibits that the museum has to offer the public? And also, I'm just dying to know, where did this love of history come from? So those two questions. Maybe we can start with that one first. I mean, you're obviously a historian. Have you always loved history?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that's been part of your fabric, your nature.
I grew up with a history lover. I think most of us who love histories, we had someone that got us addicted to it.
Yeah.
My mother would drag us to every historical site.
Drag.
And
Yeah.
drag. Well, it would drag my sister,
Right.
but I went willingly.
Right. Okay.
And I just fell in love with the stories and the history. And I think that to me, what makes history come alive is the stories.
Right.
And how they, what they went through, and then how it relates to us. It's like, what's the difference between a history buff and a historian? Is the history buff can tell you the who, what, when, and where. The historian is stuck on why and how.
That's
And I think that's for us is that's always trying to find that why and seeing how it is created in us a very unique culture that is the American culture.
right. That's very important. And Terri, you've been with the museum now for 3 years, so
It'll be 3
it'll be
years
3
on
years
4th of
coming up.
July.
That's right.
A
It's
very
coming
easy
up.
work anniversary to remember. I would say I am not a historian, and I will remind people of that all the time. I do love history for those pockets that I'm interested in. To Jason's point, when we had field trips at school, I was always the one like, yes, museum field trip. And I studied art, I studied history. So the whole concept of a museum has always been exciting to me, a museum or a library, because it was a way to see worlds beyond where I was, be it through time, be it through geography, be it through culture, seeing things that weren't like my day-to-day life was and is incredibly fascinating to me, and finding those parallels. And I think a museum is probably the best of school, a library, and I guess now the internet, a place to have all of that in one place. And so that's what makes me passionate about it. Um, Plus, I enjoy being able to help people like Jason have an outlet for their super deep knowledge about very niche topics.
That's right. We could probably sit here and talk about the history for a
Oh,
very long
he
time,
Oh, very long
especially with
absolutely could.
Jason. Yeah,
But as far as upcoming
yeah, upcoming
exhibits,
events.
we have our MecDec exhibit again opening on May 20th. We have a Solar Philanthropy Homecoming exhibit opening this July. It's a photography exhibit about Black philanthropy throughout Charlotte and its influence on America. Uh, but our two big exhibits that are coming, first is a 4D American Revolutionary War experience that has been 2 years of negotiating to get here, but it will open in April 2026. We'll be the first in the nation to open this, and when you come in, it'll be set up, yes, like a traditional exhibit, but there will be digital interactives throughout, so that you truly get this multi-dimensional experience. And it's like nothing you've ever seen. So check our social media. We'll be able to show a preview of it. Um, and so hopefully we can finish fundraising for it. But that's coming up. And then when that comes down, we are working on an exhibit with NAMAL, the National Museum of the American Latino, with the Smithsonian. And we are developing an exhibit on quinceanera culture in the Americas, or in the American South. You know, debutantes and debutante balls are a big part of Southern culture. And so because we're in East Charlotte and it's a heavy Latin American community, 40% and growing, we were inspired to say, well, how do these two cultures come together? This Southern debutante and Southern belle with traditional quinceanera culture.
Wow.
So very different topics, but they're both going to be huge blockbuster exhibits. The Revolutionary War exhibit, though, we cannot wait for people to see it.
That's
It's
going to be
gonna
a game
be
changer.
Absolutely.
It reminds me, and I know that you don't want to make the comparison, but just to give people a visual, what we experienced with the Van Gogh
Yes.
Yes.
maybe a few years back
Yes.
Mhm.
here in Charlotte now. I mean, I bet that would be that's kind of the kind of stimuli you're going to get right when you walk in with the 4D experience about the revolution.
Mhm.
So that's super exciting.
It'll be an exhibit that you would expect to see in Washington D.C.
Wow,
It's going to be that level,
good for you.
and it's going to be in our entire first floor of the museum.
Wow.
I do not know the square footage. A lot of square footage.
Yeah.
So it's is for Charlotte. One of the things that Terri always says, she's trying to make the Charlotte Museum of History a capital M museum,
Mhm.
for a capital city that
Mhm.
Charlotte is.
Mhm.
And so this is our first. I would say is really our first capital M museum exhibitry. So yeah, the town should be very excited about it.
That's exciting. That
Mhm.
definitely is exciting. Well, we might have to have you back for just a recap on that and preview once it opens. So
Absolutely.
we're really excited. Well, thank you so much for your time. And if you want to learn more about MecDec, you can pick up a copy
Yeah.
of South Park Magazine's May issue. It'll be in the May issue. It's in the May issue actually. To talk about MecDec that is being commemorated on May 20th. And thank you, Terri and Jason, for being here and for representing the Charlotte Museum of History and all the good work that you do. And I will remind listeners that there is a statue, I believe, of Captain Jack
It is.
here in Charlotte.
Yep.
So it's one of those things you were talking about. You look around the city and you see all of these things that have some historical context. So find out about it. Go visit that statue. Where is it? On the Sugar Creek?
Yeah, it is. It's part of
on the
the
Greenway?
Trail of History. Yeah.
That's right.
Mm.
So go check that out and also come visit the Charlotte Museum of History too. You can look it up on your website. What is the website?
CharlotteMuseum.org.
charlottemuseum.org. So thanks again.
Everyone's favorite museum.
Thanks again so much for listening. And again, pick up a copy of South Park Magazine or go to southparkmagazine.com. Thanks for joining us.